Hi there and welcome to another episode of Down to Business. Bit of a treat today. We've got our very own Nuatali Nelmes joining us, the current Mayor of City of Newcastle. And before I welcome Nuatali, I'll give you a few stats because it's pretty astounding when you actually have a look. The City of Newcastle, and I'll probably get some of these wrong, but only about 175,000 current population, or as we might say to the business aspect, 175,000 customers. We've got the second largest LGA outside of Greater Sydney, an annual economic output, which was surprising to me, but it shouldn't be, of $38.8 billion, and employ over 900 people. So, again, for a lot of people watching as business owners, might be a bit bigger, but it still covers off a lot of the things that we discuss generally. So, and more specifically, you've been on the council, since 2008, and the mayor since 2014, I believe?
Correct.
And also in that role, I was only there yesterday, Director of Newcastle Airport. And between all of that, still a mother, a wife, and part of your immediate community. So, Nuatali, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
No, it's great. And I glad you could fit us in with such a busy schedule. But I might start because, people would see you all the time, whether it be in media or around town or at different events, etc. But I'm interested in a bit about your background and how you ended up in this path that you find yourself on today.
Yeah, I would describe myself as, in some respects, an accidental politician. It's not that I wasn't involved in politics, but never really saw myself in the front facing roles. So I've been a member of the Australian Labor Party for 25 years. So that came up recently, and I thought, God, that's a long time. That's a commitment right there. But when I had my third child in 2007, and I had 3 under 5, and at that point in time, obviously, it was difficult to work full time, and I did know a number of sitting councillors that were retiring, and one of them was actually my father. And I said, well, I might go and do a term on council as my community service. Plus, no offence, but you're all really old, and sometimes you just don't make decisions for like young families or different demographics, because councils, a lot has changed just in the last 5 years. But back then, there was very few women and very few younger people involved in local government. And so my plan was, my children are very young at home, and I would do one term as a version of community service, but also, support facilities for everyone in Newcastle, but, young families and children. And then I'd go back to my normal life. How that didn't exactly work out. I was obviously very active. A lot of my colleagues encouraged me then to run again and then for other roles, and have been quite successful. And part of that success is probably down to not coming from the idea that I necessarily wanted to be a politician, but it came from someone that grew up in Newcastle and knows Newcastle. Like most streets like the back of your hand, particularly in local government when it comes down to that, local infrastructure or, what the community may or may not think about something. It's very easy for me to understand and predict because I'm so local. So it worked for me, and we've had to make some tough decisions to actually move Newcastle forward, particularly in the last decade. And a lot of that is around understanding where you can push and knowing that you are going to have, some pushback on you, but, how tolerable that is and how worthwhile it is. Because I don't know how long you've lived here. Have you lived here for a long time?
Geez, when you talk years now, getting up to 13 years.
Yeah, okay. So
not quite a local.
Yeah, but so the reason why I ask is if you probably go back prior to that, particularly around that local government area, there was a lot of reluctance to make a decision or a difficult decision that there would be any opposition to as well. So if you don't do that and make no decisions, nothing ever happens. So Newcastle had sort of, been in that state of limbo for quite some time. So we were quite different, myself and my team, in that we're quite happy to make a decision, evidence-based, but also then, move on and not necessarily dwell on it. And that's how you see Newcastle as it is today. Because
I guess, sorry to interrupt, just on that point, I think one of the key things that I'd link that to is whether you're making the decision for the decision itself and making sure you get the best outcome versus making a decision to ensure you get back in the next election and that sort of thing. And one probably realistically feeds the other.
100%. So particularly because I always thought, I will just go back to my normal life. I was mindful. You have to be mindful, and also that you have other people that, that are working alongside you that you want to be re-elected and the like. But particularly in those early days, it wasn't really part of my decision-making process. I was like, we are in such a point of no return in Newcastle back in the day that someone just has to make these decisions, and we need to move on. And that's what we did. And that had to do a lot with the Revitalising Newcastle project. We'd already had the decision around heavy rail, but it was also about making sure that actually worked for the city. So what we were going to get once the New South Wales government had truncated the line, there's lots of different ways that could go. And we didn't have a lot of outside investment into the city. We'd had long-held plans for this West End that we're in now to be like a CBD, but those long-held plans, like not one sod had been turned, not one brick had been laid. So there's one thing from having a plan on a page and actually having a coalition of people working together to get it to happen. So it was just, that perfect timing of there was investment from the New South Wales government that was locked in and making sure that was used to the best advantage of the city, but also the protection of heritage. So a lot of that negotiation was reducing building heights in the east end of the city, because I knew we had the heights up at this end of the city to actually get that density in. And there's a really sweet spot for cities that work in terms of actually having people living and working in them. And we just did not have the population density to make, a CBD, the length of, Hunter Street and surrounds, actually stack up and work. So there was, years of discussion about, the high street decline, all that sort of thing that had happened. And now we're on the other side of that.
Oh, and because, whilst we're talking here at a macro level, I guess, the people, a lot of that we see get affected are, the business owners with their hopes and dreams that they go and open that, new cafe at the West End or whatever it may be. And without that thought, because to be honest, half the time there's not a lot of plan that goes in. It's just that's the dream that it can very quickly, go up in the smoke, if you like.
Yeah, and when we have been really proactive, and not only there's two things that needed to happen for us at the City of Newcastle. There was the operational side, and also the political leadership side to actually make the city move and happen. Operationally, we had some quite structural issues with our balance sheet in terms of not having enough revenue to actually sustain the type of infrastructure and services that people expected through the city. And as people would know, we're rate capped in New South Wales. So we also had to make tough decisions about, marginal, small percentage increases in rate rises to actually meet the aspirations of the people. Like, people wanted their assets renewed, but we didn't have the revenue. So there's a couple of ways you can look at that. You can either increase the revenue side of your balance sheet, or you can start
cut other things out,
cut services. But we'd done a lot of work with the community, and they'd come back to us over and over again and said, we want our services enhanced and protected. We want our playgrounds and parks embellished. We want good footpaths, cycleways. We actually want to have that amenity, and we're prepared to pay a small amount for it. But those aren't politically easy decisions to make. Like no one prior to us was going to make it. So we made those decisions, and you copied it from a few different sides along the way, but they stood the test of time in terms of us being financially sustainable. But like everyone in business, like yourself, if you don't have your own house in order, how can you help anyone else? So right. A lot of it was internal and making sure we had that long-term financial sustainability locked in on the revenue side of our balance sheet. And then we've carefully managed, not increasing services, but enhancing the ones we have. And we're still on that journey at the moment.
I think that's a good point that you raised there, and I'll link it back to some of the business fuels, but, seeking feedback, making sure that your customers or your stakeholders actually, are getting what they want, getting their voice heard. And the other one is, there's only so far you can cut costs, even if that's your decision. So even if people are happy to go, I've got to cut costs, but it's like put a price increase in there. I can't do that. Well, inevitable says that sometimes you just have to.
Yeah, 100%. Particularly when you don't have the types of and the quality of facilities or services people want, and it is a level of government that's closest to the people, and being able to respond to that has in a really careful way. So it is measured. Like we have not added services, but we have worked on enhancing the ones we have. And in doing so and, protecting that financial sustainability through a number of different measures, it has allowed us to actually deliver really fulsome, upgrades to infrastructure right throughout the city for the last 7 years. So, for example, the year that I got elected Lord Mayor, we were running a works program through the city of about $50 million. We now run them at $120 million. And that's a significant resourcing internally as well to actually plan and resource that infrastructure delivery. Like you mentioned, the cafe owner or the people that get disrupted by infrastructure delivery. So that is one of the rubs that I have is people go, no, I want this fixed. But then you go to fix it and it has to be closed and changed, and there is disruption around all of the sites under construction, for example. So when you do ramp up your delivery program, more than double it, there's not only that operational challenge and that pressure on the organisation, there's also that outward facing. You've got to have more people to actually engage with everyone that's affected by the renewal. Yeah. So it's a challenge.
A challenge. I don't envy it. I know what we've got in our business, but I'll come back to when you decided, back on that journey, decided that, and this will play into a business owner, but you decided you wanted to go for whether it be your original council position or even when you said, I'm gonna head up for the mayor position. How'd you go about it? What I mean is, how important to you are goals or a plan? And I guess even beyond that, once you're in that position, how important is planning and strategy within getting the outcomes for council that you want?
Yeah, we do a lot of long-term planning, whether it's financial planning or community planning. So we have actually just this year earlier done our 2040 community strategic plan, and it is really important in local government to do that work. And the consultation for that, often we deliberately go out to groups that wouldn't normally contact us as well to get the feedback of, what they would like to see or how they see the city in the future. And that very long-term visioning actually then feeds down into how we deliver both a long-term financial plan but also a 4-year delivery program and then our 1-year budget at council. And making sure that's all mapped out and planned. Obviously, you have different things that change along the way and different issues arise that you deal with, but it is quite a planned environment and a consulted environment to get that planning. So that is exceptionally important. Politics is slightly different. So you're trying to mix like an executive oversight into like a bureaucracy. So relatively layered and stable, like hard to shift, the traits of a bureaucracy. And then you have to overlay that with politics, and being in Newcastle and with its own media cycle and sort of, the largest via revenue council, it has a huge time constraint and also visibility in dealing with lots of different forms of media and scrutiny as well. So the politics of it is a kind of a different strategy. You have to, for me, I think, be a little bit flexible and, willing to, work long hours and also think about many different things all at the same time, like all the different stakeholders, the needs of the organisation, the needs of the community, needs of other levels of government, the needs of neighbouring areas. Like, I'm very mindful that a lot of people commute into Newcastle to work, so we might have those population figures, but between 9 and 5, excluding COVID times, they actually balloon because people often live in surrounding LGAs that are more residential focused and come into Newcastle to work. So you need to cater for that community as well. They might not vote for you, but you need to cater for them and how they transit in and out of the city and those type of things. So the politics is you need to be pretty nimble, thick-skinned, definitely thick-skinned, and also have a good political support team around you, which I'm fortunate I've got a really good team.
Yeah.
A lot of our success is due to the fact that we all work together and we're a really solid team. And in politics, that can be unusual. Often it's really easy to sort of dangle a carrot over here and pick someone off and, pull them apart. But we have managed to really stay focused, and the councillors that I have worked very closely with for a long time are always focused on the community and the citizens and those long-term goals, and have really stuck to being a really solid team.
Yeah, because and we say this quite often with whether it be clients or whatever it may be. Like, at the end of the day, what are you there for? It's not like you have to be best friends and go and drinking buddies and that sort of stuff. But really, what's the purpose and what are you there trying to, I guess, achieve and keep an open mind to?
Yeah, 100%. So that teamwork, even though people think politics is an individual sport, the most successful political groupings or leadership is really being part of a group of people and a team that are actually delivering, and that's what we have.
Okay, very good. So you got into accounts, and you remind yourself before how long it's been, but I'm sure it's gone the blink of an eye. But when you talk about going from your normal life to handling a budget of some of the numbers I mentioned before, that's a huge budget, much bigger than probably most business owners, a large majority would ever see. But how did you adapt that? What kind, how'd you have to get up to speed, and what kind of, I guess, routines do you put in place or habits to make sure that you stay on top of, and aside from working with your team?
Yeah, they're really good questions. So for me, I was fortunate that I did get elected, as you mentioned, as a councillor in 2008, and I was in my very early 30s, and I was, quite diligent about wanting to learn everything, and I'm still learning to this day. I think that's an important part of any role. So I also came from a background, a business background, so balance sheets and P&Ls weren't strangers to me, so none of that bothered me. But I did notice in local government it wasn't necessarily an elected councillor's area of comfort. So I was probably unusual in that sense, but I had an academic background in that area, not necessarily overly practical, but that didn't really bother me either. So I did do a lot of work on the planning side, so that's like urban planning and educating myself in that area once I was elected, because you kind of need to be across all of it. I thankfully have quite a good memory, so I can remember who said what, 10 years ago at a meeting, which is fantastic, and drives everyone crazy. So there was a couple of things, and I was unusual, but I didn't think I was unusual. So you have to imagine, for me, I was like, well, this is all makes sense to me, and, listen to the staff giving you advice, go and seek good counsel. But I suppose looking back now that I'm in my 40s, second half, I probably can understand, like I could never understand why, particularly maybe older men would just look at me and go, well, what would she know? Like I had a lot of that. And you just can't, you can't argue and say, well, of course I know. I just thought the only way to deal with all of that, and there was a bit of it around at the time, well, is, look, you're just going to have to see. So it was just like, prove it. So I guess I had a bit to prove, probably as a young woman, and, you know, probably I think the youngest Lord Mayor ever elected in Australia, and probably not from a background that people would have thought, oh, she will naturally be able to handle that budget. It's not that complicated, to be fair. Like, it's such a regulated industry, and like we get double audited now. So it really is like you only have so many sources of revenue, and you do have expense control. Like your wage bill is pretty big, and most councils, you know, that is the majority percentage of their expenses. For us, we are lucky. We do have other sources of revenue, and we fortunately have Summer Hill Waste Management Centre, which provides a really good source of revenue. But in local government, even under the legislation, you can't actually just go out and set up businesses for other sources of revenue. So when you look at it, to me, it's not that complex a business, because you only have limited revenue sources and surely a limited complex. We deliver 42 services. Complex in the service delivery of so many different services, that is, you know, difficult to manage, and particularly, you know, how much you need to spend delivering each service. That's where the complexity comes in. But the overall budgeting, I don't think super complex.
Well, I guess when you take that view, it's good because, you know, you try and simplify, but reality is it doesn't matter what size business, you still, if you get timely and accurate information.
Yes.
You know, that's probably key for me. You actually read it and review it.
Yes.
Which there'd be several councils, well, not just New South Wales based, but throughout Australia that probably wish they would have done that. You know, and I guess you've got, you know, really that segregation between your management team that are responsible and you guys, where really from a private business point of view, it's that board versus management. Yeah. But in many small businesses, they're wearing every hat. So I think the key thing is just making sure that you're getting that information, you're critically reviewing it, looking for, as I said, what stands out, what doesn't make sense. Yeah, exactly. And that's how we review our annual financial statements. But we put in practices a number of years ago, really good ones, where the minimum standard in local government is quarterly reporting of financials. We get a monthly report, so you can see any trends emerging early before it happens. And interesting things, you know, if people are interested in, particularly in your world, the way the budget runs and the way traditionally local government run has evolved over time. I think back in the day they would just do, you know, 1 year of a works program and then sort of move stuff around, and it was all maybe a little bit ad hoc. It's much more structured now. But what we do see is a big spend coming to the 30th of June every year. So we've been trying to flatten out those peaks and troughs by, you know, doing a lot more forward planning of infrastructure delivery, because really councils are a lot of things, but the big money is obviously in wages and infrastructure projects. Well, it is now that we run a lot of infrastructure projects. So making sure that you got your QSs right, you know, tough time at the moment, particularly, you know, post all the COVID disruption supply chain, you've also got the construction cost. So, you know, factoring in those type of overruns. So you have to, there's the science of it, but there's also, you know, being able to tell if people are telling you the truth. So I obviously, like everyone, I just like, even if it's bad news, I just want to know, so then I know how to deal with it. So, you know, if there's something's run over time or something's happened, just tell me. Yeah, don't hide it. I mean, unfortunately, common sense isn't that common. No. But, you know, looking at some of the things you just said, and this is a key one that for business owners, I think that it's not standard in our accounting packs. It's not standard in our small business software, but a cash flow statement. Cash is still king, whether it's council or whether it's another business. That's exactly what you're saying. If we've had an overrun, we need to pull cash from somewhere else. We need to know about it.
Yeah, 100%. So in COVID, we actually pulled cash to deliver economic stimulus. So everyone freaks out about, I've got to have a balanced budget. Well, the way our balanced budgets, like revenue and expenditure in one financial year, but we also have reserves sitting there for projects. So when you have over 300 million in reserves for projects, like the best thing you can do, if you've got the internal resourcing and capability during a downturn, from my type of economic theory, is you actually draw on your reserves, or if you had to, borrowings, but we don't need to do that, and actually stimulate the economy. So we did that during COVID. So we ran what would be structural deficits, but they weren't on borrowings, they were just on reserves and bringing those works forward. Yeah.
Very good. So you mentioned people several times, and we may have covered some of this, but, I think the best leaders I've always seen rely on having the best people around them, and the different skill sets, and not thinking, we'll not be righteous enough to think that we know everything, etc.
No.
What's some of the habits you get in and some of the challenges, I guess, you see and how you navigate that, especially being, I guess, from the management team one step removed, but you've got a lot of different people that make up what is council and the organisation.
Yeah, 100%. First and foremost, you really want a good group of councillors, and I'm fortunate that we have a majority, so we can actually go in the one direction. I think that's also been good for the city to actually have a group that have a vision and are going through the motions and the stages of executing that vision, rather than going one decision this week, one next month, and sort of changing their mind all the time. Now, that doesn't mean you can't change a course if something's not working, and we've done that a number of times. Tried something, didn't work, try a different way, take on feedback. It's not about not taking on feedback. It's about having people that, particularly in politics, that have got an agreement to work together. So that's one side of it. The other side's really important. The City of Newcastle had a sort of a revolving door of general managers prior to us actually going to market and recruiting an early career CEO, and it was very deliberate strategy, even though everyone criticised it at the time. We wanted early career because it was an absolute lion's den in there. Lion's den. Would be like an episode of Game of Thrones back in the day, and we needed someone and that would be able to deal with it and actually, want to push through for their own career, and was happy to sort of put in the hours and then build a team around them. So what's actually happened is that the organisation itself has been on a journey of transformation, of being much more outwardly focused, having a much more diverse, I should say, senior leadership team. I think we're 60% women now. When I was first elected, I think the group of 20 plus were all men. Maybe there was only one woman at the time. So it's a much more diverse group of leaders, and also really committed to the long-term vision and really respectful of the elected council, because I'm very well aware, like being in local government, you can have councils that make odd decisions or councils that do odd things, and you can imagine being a senior executive going, oh God, look what I've got to work with.
That's right, yeah.
So having people that, even though those challenges exist, are happy to, stay the course. And we've had, people in that leadership group that have won public service medal awards for the hours and days and nights of work that they put into the city, and running the teams, like shutting services down during COVID, then restarting them, and just everything that goes with running a business of that size. You couldn't do it without those people, and that's really on the management side. But it's not as traditional under the Local Government Act. The roles aren't as traditional, because I do sit on a number of other boards as well, as you mentioned. It's not as separated. There's a lot more interaction from that senior management level, just because you are representing community concerns on a daily basis. You have to sort of be involved in understanding how the work gets done and who the work gets done by, and the decision points a bit further down in the organisation.
Well, and as you said before, you need to be quite nimble.
Yeah.
You know, can't necessarily wait the month or the quarter or whatever it may be.
Yeah, 100%.
We've mentioned several times about the different stakeholders that you have, whether it be community, could be other councillors, could be the people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, even state and fed government. But from that point of view, you could have a lot of conflicts and a lot of just want to go and open the bottle of a night time. But you know, what are some of the key behaviours, and maybe some that you've learned over time that maybe didn't happen? You know, as you said, you're quite young when you got into it. But what are some of the things that you apply to manage stakeholders, keep the peace as much as you can, and probably maintain your own sanity for that matter?
Yeah, I worked really hard and still do, but particularly in those early days, the hours were all day and all night, 7 days a week. They are sort of like that, but they're a little bit more manageable now. I think it could be also post-COVID, but it was just, you know, sometimes like every weekend we're putting out some fire of some description, and, you know, you were dealing with, you're in situations of high conflict in the early days a lot, because you're trying to transform an organisation that has people in it that don't want to transform, they want to maintain the status quo. And if you've come in to reform that and change that, there's a lot of power in the Local Government Act on the administrative side. They're going to fight you for that. So I had a lot of pushback internally. And as soon as you get that, you just have people that will just pick you off politically, like all around the edges. That happened, like, you name it, they came for me. You name it, they came. And we managed to, you know, defend that where we can. You know, I have a background playing a bit of sport, so naturally competitive. Normally you walk off the court and it's all done, but this is like you're always on the court. Yeah. So thankfully I don't think it would be that type of reform that we have done wouldn't be for the faint-hearted or if you wanted a quiet life, but we kind of got through that. And you do have an unbelievably large amount of stakeholders. So once you're through the high conflict phase, and, you know, some of them drop off, some of them stay around, I just try to be just myself. And some people like that, some people don't. Is what it is. But also just, you know, honest about what I think about things, and, you know, really clear about what I can deliver, because people want the world. And even though it's sort of like saying no in a way, whether it's not council's responsibility, or I just know that there's no way we'll ever find that type of money in the budget, or it's not ever going to sort of meet the test of a priority, I have to sort of be honest with people and say, we're probably not going to be able to deliver that, but we are going to be able to do all these things. And if you really want that, you'll have to build a coalition of support, and you might have to get funding from other levels of government or whatever it might be. So there are, just not just community stakeholders, business stakeholders, and there's a leadership expectation. So I'm exceptionally mindful, and I have been ever since I was elected, that wherever I am, it doesn't matter if I'm overseas. I have done Bloomberg Harvard scholarships with other mayors around the world. You know, might never have been to Australia, let alone Newcastle. I'm very mindful that however I'm perceived is often how they'll perceive the city. So I'm very mindful that I need to be putting my best foot forward all the time, because that is then a reflection of everybody else in the city. And that's important to me, that the image and the pride, the local pride of Newcastle, is raised up. Yeah. And if you're in one of these roles, you have to be mindful and responsible for that, I think.
Yeah, and we even doing that to our own people within our organisation, that like it or lump it, perception's reality.
Yes.
And you know, when they say if you do something well, they might tell one person you do something bad, or they're perceived bad, and you're 10 or 15 or whatever the number is these days.
Yeah.
And social media and that just puts more and more pressure on it.
Yeah.
So
and imagine being council, because like councils often get blamed for everything.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate it. But so I think that's a good one from a business owner's point of view. You're always on whenever you're in that, I guess, public profile and that as well. And in your role, probably more so than most business owners, that public area or domain is probably a lot wider than most have to face.
Yeah, it's wide.
And I imagine, you don't need to comment on this, but I imagine some of the council meetings, especially said back in the day, could be quite a combative environment.
Yeah, I don't mind. Like, I don't really enjoy conflict, but if it comes to my door, I will deal with it. So it seems to be that people would seek out some sort of conflict with me. And I'd be like, really? Do we have to? I'd prefer just to get along. Like, my preference is just to get along, just in general life, personal, whatever else. But if people really want to seek out conflict with me, then I just deal with it. And it is what it is. Yeah.
I've said.
Yeah.
I guess I want to flick it now. I mean, there's been some great things there that I think we could talk about all day, but I'm mindful of time. But with regard to a business owner and what they can take out of, the examples in council there, but flip it now to the city of Newcastle. What do you see personally, or even from a council's point of view, around the future of Newcastle as a city, but also specifically as a place for businesses from outside maybe, or ones that are here to either establish or thrive?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going very well. We've just had a recent economic update, and in that, even though post-COVID numbers are different because of net migration, comparable cities like Geelong or Wollongong, particularly Wollongong, their diversity sort of in their net migration rates are stagnant, where ours are, increasing percentage points, which means there are more diverse people. I think that's really important for an aspirational global city. I think it's attracting that talent base is actually the cornerstone of our economic development strategy. A lot of strategies, not just the City of Newcastle, but the type of economic development strategies you see in government outside of a capital city will be about attracting like the giant employer that will employ all the people, which is how Newcastle used to sort of be under BHP. Ours is very different. It's really around attracting talent, and that's done in a number of different ways. We've run a number of programs to attract that talent here, and we're going to continue to do so, working in collaboration with local businesses in doing that. But it's about providing, a place where people want to live. We're very fortunate because it is a beautiful place to live, and it's about people outside of Newcastle knowing that. That's been another one of our strategies we'll continue to pursue. Attracting that talent base, but knowing where your strengths are. So our strengths in this region are in energy, and there's going to be there already is, but there's going to be huge shifts in energy supply, energy production over the next decade for the world, but particularly Australia. And the place where that's going to happen is the Hunter. So that is the next big jigsaw puzzle, because it really is a puzzle at the moment of what that and how that looks, and making sure that we are best placed to take advantage of that. And the jobs that will come from that are exceptionally important for this region. So that is probably one of the big next decade challenges. And council, has roles to play in terms of making sure we're providing that platform in the city for innovation to attract the talent here, that we are, supporting those industries and those businesses in the private sector that are wanting to locate here or wanting to remain here. So some of that work, I think, will really get pointed over the next couple of years. But it's not bedded down at the moment. And that's the challenge I really see. We've grown our professional services since industry that you're in. I think it's still health care is the number one employer in the region. And we also have, plenty of opportunity also around the defence space, particularly at Williamtown. And as you know, being a part owner of the airport, we have, very big growth plans there as a global gateway. So
yeah, it was funny yesterday. We were commenting and said I was at the airport and coming back into Newcastle. It was like 20 minutes. How much better than this in Sydney? But with all those growth plans, and also becomes more challenges too with redirection of traffic and high numbers. So it'd be interesting to see that navigation.
Yeah, and they are all the challenges that rub, and you have to manage community expectations and, the development that occurs, around the airport site when we're building the terminal and the international runway. But I think they're good challenges to have because, prior to this last decade, we didn't have those challenges. We had a lot of protesting and a lot of complaining, but there wasn't any movement. So I think they're all manageable, and, I hope that we have congestion on that road out to the airport, because it means that we'll actually be hitting our forward passenger number targets and potential freight targets as well. So I'm looking forward to that actually occurring.
I think the key thing you said, where you've, from a council point of view, it's having that view with most, if not all, that what are we here for? It certainly has to be the same from, and I don't think it's quite there in the business community yet, but, if you want to maintain the growth or have this exceptional place to live and provide more and more opportunities for next gen, etc., then you do have to give and take a bit and know what are we trying to get. So I think it's a great one for business too. Yeah,
absolutely. And you've actually coined it well. There's always in our style of leadership in the city, there's always a bit of give and take. It's not all one way, and it's not die in a ditch style politics. Hate die in a ditch style politics. It's like, well, what was the point of that? Yes, you're wonderful, you've died in that ditch, but so's everybody else. You're better off negotiating an outcome that might not be, your perfect, personal outcome, but at least you've got an outcome that's, moving everyone forward.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. I'm going to try and capture a few of the key points there. I think business owners could learn from it. We said before about, planning, absolutely planning and do enough evidence. So get your stakeholder feedback, your customer feedback, your supplier feedback, whatever it may be, and make sure you put your plan around it. Can't just keep cutting costs. At some time you have to maybe have a look at the revenue, or cut some things out and reallocate some of the services.
Do both.
Yeah, I think that financial part of it is having a good team around you that can deliver, but having regular reports, timely reports, etc. Make sure you know what you're looking at. And cash is king. Say it all the time. It's even better when you hear it from such a big organisation. The team around you and making sure that everyone has to be best friends, but we need to know what we're there for and what we're trying to achieve and get along. And that stakeholder expectations one I thought was great. Not shying away from the hard conversation, which far too many people do. If there is conflict, dealing with it, but more importantly, communication, and the more of it, probably the better, especially in somewhere like council. I was interested to see them. How can business owners take advantage of some of the things that were mentioned for the future of Newcastle? Energy, talent pools, etc., and working together with a bit of give and take. So for me, it's funny we talk about council being a government organisation, but at the end of the day, it's still a business.
Yes,
it's just not a profit making from a point of view of private investment and that sort of stuff. So it's interesting when you break it down. It's a big budget. It's a lot of moving parts, but it's still very similar to the mum and dad corner store, just that they're wearing every hat, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know sometimes what would be more difficult these days.
Yeah, well, yeah. I can see it. But one final question from me is really, I ask most guests, what's your the best lesson or the best piece of advice or what you've learned from the biggest mistake or whatever you want to share that people could take away?
The best lesson or the best piece of advice? People have always said just be true to yourself. So people try and pull you in all different directions, and I will, think about it, consider it, but at the end of the day, if it's too far away from, my own, personal ideology or belief system, then I can't do that. But I'm honest about it. So it's just be true to yourself and your own values.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us, Nuatali.
Pleasure.
Hopefully everyone got, I'm sure they would have a lot out of that. It's good to get a bit of insight into council and you as a person that we wouldn't often get. So thank you very much. And until next time, cheers.
Bye.